Cảm ơn vậy anh. Good evening, everyone. My name is Susan Gooden. I have the pleasure of serving as the Dean of the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs here at Virginia Commonwealth University. And it is indeed my pleasure to welcome you to our annual Wilder Symposium. I'd also like to extend a hearty welcome to our symposium participants who are viewing us live stream as well. So we appreciate those who are joining us in person as well as those who are joining us virtually. I would like to also acknowledge and extend my appreciation for our Board of Visitors members who are in attendance this evening, Dr. Clifton Pay and Dr. Dale Jones. I'd also like to thank our Provost, Fotis Soteropoulos, for joining us this evening. So I will keep my remarks brief because I know we want to get to this exciting panel topic, HBCUs in the absence of support, which is a critically important topic for us to be examining today. But I would not be doing the job that they pay me to do if I didn't brag just a wee bit about the Wilder School and how we are a top-ranked program of public affairs in the country. We're in the top 15% nationwide. That's among more than 250 schools across the United States. And we are the #1 ranked program in Virginia by US News and World Report in the areas of social policy, urban policy, public management and leadership, and public policy analysis. We are so proud of the work that we do from our faculty and our staff, our students, our signature Commonwealth poll. All of these things are done in order that we may do our part to fulfill our obligation to foster the embetterment of society. This event, the Wilder Symposium, is a very special event for us in the Wilder School. This is a signature event which was curated by the namesake of our school and the nation's first African-American elected governor, L. Douglas Wilder. He has always been very generous in terms of his talents and making sure that he takes his talents and serves and distributes them among the community in which he has grown up in, and which he continues to serve as a respected leader on many, many topics. So these symposia are a way for us to come together and engage in important topics. It provides a vibrant platform for discovery and critical discussion, both regionally and nationally. Some of our previous topics include racism, health, and accountability, race in academia, and the triple pandemic, implications for racial equity and public policy. But not only do we know that Governor Wilder is great within the Wilder School, but others across the nation recognize his excellence as well. And in fact, tomorrow, Governor Wilder will receive the Defender of Democracy Award from the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. Larry Sabato, the director of the UVA Center for Politics, wrote in a press release today, Doug Wilder gifted to the nation and the world a broader and more inclusive understanding of the word democracy itself. And he continues to pave new paths for current and future generations of Americans. But also, on the back of your program, we want you to pay special attention to a save the date that we have provided for you. And this is going to be a very special occasion, 2 of them, as a matter of fact. So a little bit of background here. 3 years ago, when the governor was going to turn 90, we were putting plans in place to have a wonderful celebration of his 90th birthday. However, a small thing called COVID got in our way, and we were only able to do a virtual event, which was a fantastic virtual event, but it was virtual nonetheless. And so we are preparing for 2 major events to occur in January of 2024. The big event will be the National Ovation Gala, which will be held in Washington, D.C. on the evening of Saturday, January the 20th at 7 p.m. So be on the lookout for much more information. We will be honoring and recognizing the governor's 70 years of public service dating back to his service on the front lines in the Korean War. That will be preceded by a documentary premiere that is going to capture many of the behind the scenes aspects of Governor Wilder and the many talents that he brings beyond those in the political arena. And that will be on his 93rd birthday, January the 17th, Wednesday at 5 p.m. here in Richmond. So you'll be hearing much more about those events as we get closer to that time, but I did want to bring those to your attention. Tonight's discussion examines a really important topic, HBCUs in the absence of support. We are pleased to have a moderator for tonight's panel who will formally introduce the governor as well as our panelists, Dr. Bob Holsworth. Dr. Bob Holsworth is someone who is well known and respected throughout Richmond, Virginia, and nationally for his critical political insights on politics, public policies, and his phenomenal insights in terms of what those implications might be. He has provided national commentary in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many other venues, including the BBC. He is also the founder of our Center for Public Policy here at the Wilder School, and he has previously served both as a Board of Visitors member, as Dean of the College of Humanities and Sciences, and Director of the Wilder School. And I will also say that he received the Outstanding Faculty Award from Chev, and he is personally responsible for recruiting me to VCU. So, Dr. Holsworth.
I made at least one good decision. There. Let me just give us an overview of what we're going to be doing this evening. We have 4 distinguished panelists that I'm going to introduce all at once in a moment. And after I introduce the panelists, I'm going to ask Governor Wilder to make some opening remarks. We're going to ask the panelists to make small presentations of themselves, about 10 minutes, addressing these basic issues involved in the major theme here. And then afterwards, we want to have questions and answers from the audience. I know on the way in, you've received opportunities to write down questions, and I hope that you continue to do so, and we'll be able to pick them up and we'll get them to me as the moderator. And after the panelist discussion, we'll have answers to your questions and a conversation between the panelists. So let me just say about our panelists today. It's an extraordinarily distinguished group of individuals that we have here, both in terms of their intellectual and academic accomplishments and also their personal accomplishments. We're going to start off in a few moments with Dr. Nakeina Douglas, who is right now the director of the Research Institute for Social Equity at VCU. Previously, she had directed the Grace Harris Leadership Institute. I can't tell you how many people I've met in the community, particularly women who were through the Women in Leadership program, who just asked me, do I know Dr. Douglas Glenn on that front. The Research Institute for Social Equity is a relatively new institute at VCU that came through the brainchild of Dr. Dean Gooden and Governor Wilder. And it really positions VCU to be the leading university researcher on the whole range of issues that are involved social equity and race in Virginia. I think it really is extraordinary accomplishment, and we're very fortunate to have Dr. Douglas Glenn leading it. Our second speaker is going to be Dr. Wayne Frederick, who just finished a 10-year term as president of Howard University. Dr. Frederick, I'm going to apologize for trying to be brief about his story, but it's extraordinary. He was born in Port of Spain, Trinidad. At an early age, he was diagnosed with sickle cell disease. He got very interested in science. At age 16, he went to Howard University. And at age 22, he graduated from Howard and its medical school. You heard me right, age 22. He's a renowned cancer surgeon who developed new techniques for radioablation for liver cancer, a new technique for being more effective in treating rectal cancer, and then ultimately became president of Howard, where he instituted a period of enormous growth, where he instituted new programs in STEM, new partnerships with places like Google, and in the meantime, also taught a course on minority serving institutions. So we are really pleased to have Dr. Frederick with us today. Our third speaker is going to be Judge Roger Gregory, who is on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, the first African-American to serve on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. He has just completed a term as Chief Judge of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Prior to that, he was a partner in a law firm in Virginia. What was the name? Wilder and Gregory, maybe, on that front. And he was a tremendous leader in the community in Virginia. Every organization that he was in, he's been president of. The Old Dominion Bar Association, the Museum of Black History, the Richmond Industrial Development Authority, and rector of the VCU Board of Visitors. I've had the pleasure of serving with Judge Gregory on a Virginia Bar Association committee for the past 4 or 5 years. It's kind of a think tank for the Bar Association. And at every meeting, Judge Gregory's comments are so extraordinarily impressive because he just combines this keen intellect with a real concern for the challenges that face people on a day-to-day basis. It's just been a privilege and honor to know him as well. Finally, we have our Attorney General, Jason Miyares, who has come from Virginia Beach to serve in state government. He has a distinguished career. He's a child of immigrants from Cuba, I believe, and is the first Hispanic individual who is serving in statewide office in Virginia. He was previously the Deputy Commonwealth Attorney in Virginia Beach. I think you probably served with a student of mine, Colin Stolley, there as well. He served 3 terms in the House of Delegates. He is now our elected Attorney General, and he formulated and developed an opinion on where funding should come or could come from state government to HBCUs. That's a very important piece of trying to move forward in Virginia there. And so we're very fortunate to have him here as well. And then finally, last but never least, our former governor, Doug Wilder, there. And I know that he dislikes long introductions. When he was governor, basically what you'd ask him, what do you want to say for as an introduction? He would say, please introduce me as, His Excellency, the Governor. And so please, His Excellency, the Governor will give our opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Bob. You almost got it right. I told him, said, just introduce me as the governor of Virginia. I left the excellency part out. Of course, it sounded good. Can't tell you how pleased I am to be here. And well, when people are speaking sometimes in the morning, when people are saying, how you doing? And I said, well, I woke up. And they said, how you getting along? I said, any kind of way is better than the other. And I really mean that. And I want to salute and thank this tremendous panel that we have here. I have personal and real relationships with several of them to the extent that I could go on forever. I could have listened to Bob forever talk about the accomplishments of many of them. And yet I want to hear from them because I salute our dean. And I never thought this diminutive little lady from Martinsville would rise to be the power that she is. I mean, it's just a pleasure and I don't have to speak for those who have worked with her. They all know, Bob knows. And as has been pointed out in terms of her introduction of Bob, he was the driving force behind what we did at our school. Quite frankly, I think, and I know he was the driving force behind the school being named for yours truly. But separate and apart from that, he's still involved and they are involved. All of the people that we have speaking to us today are involved. Now that's something that you say, well, everybody's involved. That's not true. If everybody were involved, we wouldn't be here today with this topic. We wouldn't be talking about why there is this lack of support for historical Black colleges and universities. The acronym is used to reference the colleges that were available to educate, well, I think they said Negroes, but at that time we were colored people. And so we moved up. We're Black now. The title, historically Black colleges and universities. When I was coming up, you better not call nobody Black in our neighborhoods because it was considered insulting, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, we accept and think things are going to happen just because we moved ahead. We moved past certain things. And yet, we also know the more things change, the more they seem to remain the same. And so I can speak so definitively about the value of historical Black colleges and universities because that's all I've ever known. But for Virginia Union, I wouldn't be here talking with you tonight in the capacity in which I speak to you. But for Howard University, I wouldn't have been able to get a law degree from anywhere. I couldn't have gone to the University of Richmond. So when people think of those things, and I'm not speaking of these things to make you feel sorry for me, because I feel very, very good about wherever it is I've been and where I am and what I'm doing. And that's the thing I want to see with young people. I want them to have that pride, that stride, that belief in themselves, but they can only receive that if we don't, unless we accentuate education and the great need for it and why we're doing it. I was pleased to be able to have the Attorney General, Jason Miyares, grant the audience that I wanted him to understand why his opinion was necessary. Because from people who are in the positions to do and to know better, many of them didn't know. When you would ask the question, say, well, why aren't we receiving some money from the state? Well, we can't do it. Why? Because you're a private school. Oh, that's right. The state can't support private schools. That's right. Can't do that. Oh, that's good. And so when I had my occasions to sit down with Jason and speak with him, he understood exactly what I was saying. He said I wanted to drill down further in it, and he did. And in so doing, he wrote the opinion. And in Virginia, an Attorney General's opinion is the law of the land until it's removed by some court of competent jurisdiction. It means so much to me to know that now that excuse can't be used, or you can't. The only reason you cannot support historical Black colleges and universities today, the only reason is you don't want to. The only reason. I said to my good friend Bobby Scott the other day at his historical annual picnic, and they had a bunch of people there, good people, well-meaning people. And I said, Bobby, we were able to come together when you were in the Senate and I was in the Senate to bring about some things and made some things happen when there were only about 3 of us. 3. And he said, well, yes. And one of the reasons we were able to do that is because when things hurt, we said, ouch. We didn't believe it wasn't. Bobby, for instance, said, how can we continue to elect our judges to serve over our courts when they belong to private clubs that discriminate against people of color? How can you do that? And he said, what do you think? What do you think about it? I said, I think you should run with it. And I couldn't vote for it at the time because I was the lieutenant governor. And so when he put the measure in, and people were bringing up all kinds of excuses as to why we couldn't do this and couldn't do that, it was my job then to rule on the constitutionality as to what they were saying. And I just said, when the bill was brought up to vote for, and when the vote finally was announced, I said, the bill passes. And that made it the law of the land. And so I'm being somewhat critical, but hopefully gently critical of those who are in positions now to do something. Don't talk about it, do it. Why should I elect you? And I'm not speaking about any particular groups, any particular party. I'm speaking about all those who have the obligation to the people of Virginia. I couldn't go to Virginia Union, of the University of Richmond. And I would walk because my father didn't believe in paying 2 ways for you to go to school. I lived in Churchill at 28th and P. Had to go to Armstrong School, which was at Prentice and Lee Streets, almost at Chamberlain Avenue and Lee. And my father would say, okay, it's a one-way ticket. You can do it either way you want it. You can walk to school, ride back, or ride to school and walk back. Well, he came from a horrible beginning himself. And he knew what it meant to have to squeeze dollars and pull them together. And in the process of so doing, I didn't want to go to Virginia Union. Didn't have any money. Didn't have any way to get there in terms of sometimes we had to just thumb a ride across the viaduct at the time. And when I went to Armstrong High School, for instance, we didn't have new books. Always the books that were passed down from John Marshall. See, people don't know these things. I'm not here complaining. I'm the last person in the world to be complaining because all I wanted to do is say, get out of my way. And that's why it's so important today. And as we look at what's going on in terms of disparity, 2018, VCU employed 1 white faculty member for every 20 students, with only 1 Black instructional faculty member for every 225 students. The greatest disparity amongst all faculty backgrounds. In fact, Black faculty made up nearly 6.2% of all university professors. Only 1 Black faculty member for every 40 Black students. And so, first of all, we must acknowledge the discrepancy and then immediately correct it. Nothing is acceptable. Nothing else will be acceptable. And so, one of the things that we had take place right in the neighboring state of Maryland, the legislature, led by its Black caucus, demanded of then Governor Hogan that his budget directly address this issue. And they said this, okay, you don't have to put the money in the budget for that if you don't choose to do so, but we are not going to vote for your budget. I don't care what else it has in it. And Hogan reluctantly agreed. Now they have greater support. They have greater involvement of the state with its historical Black colleges and universities. We can do the same thing here And so we need to do that. What I'm pleased about, moreover, is the people who recognize that we do need to do this. We do need to bring about the need for our young people to be involved. The questions that will be asked of our panelists, and they're well equipped to handle them all, hopefully will be driving us to make certain that when we leave here, we don't wait for another symposium to take place, but we do it on our own. That we say these kinds of things in our churches. We say them in our schools. We say them in our homes. We say them in our streets. We say them in our fraternities. We say them wherever in our sororities. We say them wherever we are, that there has to be some appreciation for where we are in America today. I watched the debate last night. I've watched some of the others that have taken place. And the one constant that always stays with me is who up there and which among you and who among you is really speaking for the people? Who is speaking for the people? I hope when we finish with this symposium today, that you leave with that question in your mind after hearing from the distinguished panelists that we have, and then going back to your environs. Those who say they speak to the people at election time, where are they during the time of need? Where are they when it's important for them to stand up and speak and to demand what's right and to criticize what's wrong? Or are they there merely to say, oh, I am the honorable this, thus, and so? No, I'm being critical for that reason. You don't run for office and get elected to represent yourself. And don't forget that. You run for office to get elected to represent who? The people. God bless you. Thank you for being with us today.
Good evening. I am going to start off this evening providing a little bit of context and history for this evening's discussion. When we think about historically Black colleges and universities, we often conjure up nostalgia of images portrayed in popular media. Shows like A Different World at Hillman College, where we followed the journeys of characters Whitley and Dwayne, provided a psychosocial cultural window into the world of college life. Films like School Days delved into the complex inter and intracultural dynamics of Black campuses and community life, while Boys in the Hood showcased the promises of life-changing opportunities sought through HBC enrollment. We gained insights into the reality on the yard through shows like College Hill, which featured our neighboring institution, Virginia State University. We explored the balance of academics and social life through films like The Great Debaters, Drumline, and Stomp the Yard. We were equally invested in the postgraduate experiences of Howard alumni living single in New York City. And more recently, Beyonce's awe-inspiring Coachella performance reminded us why homecoming is a celebratory draw of Black excellence for students and alumni. While HBCUs have been popularized through television and media, their true depth, culture, and societal significance are intimately understood by their students, alumni, and dedicated supporters. The narratives we see on the screen are but a glimpse of the multifaceted HBCU experience. The history of HBCUs extends far beyond their portrayal on screen, testifying to their resilience and determination as major players in the academic arena. In 2021, there were 99 HBCUs across 19 states, Washington, D.C., and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The earliest institutions like Cheney, Lincoln, and Wilberforce were pioneers in providing educational opportunities for Black individuals. Nearly 90% of today's HBCUs were established in the South by the Freedmen's Bureau and religious organizations between 1865 and 1900, with a significant number emerging just 2 years after emancipation. Among these institutions, 50 were publicly funded, while the remaining 49 were private nonprofit institutions. Notably, a higher percentage of HBCUs are public institutions when compared to predominantly white universities. The evolution of HBCUs in the United States has been shaped by several key legislative acts. The Morrill Act of 1862 allocated 30,000 acres of land to each member of Congress to establish at least one college in their respective states with an emphasis on agriculture, engineering, and mechanical arts for farmers and working class people previously excluded from higher education. The second Morrill Act of 1890 led to the creation of 17 HBCUs, including them as land-grant colleges, to provide educational opportunities for Black Americans. In Virginia, the two schools that emerged as a result of these two acts are Virginia Tech and Virginia State University. The Higher Education Act of 1965 provided federal funding to strengthen HBCUs and address disparities in higher education opportunities and resources for Black Americans. It aimed to improve the quality and effectiveness in providing education to Black students, providing support for academic programs, libraries, faculty development, and student services, make higher education more accessible to students by focusing on federal financial assistance, including grants, loans, and work-study programs, and provided funding for the construction and improvement of facilities. Additionally, various executive orders have aimed to support and strengthen HBCUs to promote racial equity in education. In 2002, George Bush established the President's Board of Advisors, whose purpose was to advise the President and Secretary of Education on strengthening HBCUs and increasing their capacity to serve their students. In 2010, Barack Obama signed an executive order to promote excellence, innovation, and sustainability at HBCUs aimed at enhancing their capacity to provide quality education, increase their participation in federal programs, and promote research and innovation. In 2017, Donald Trump signed an order to move the White House initiative on HBCUs from the Department of Education to the White House. The order also sought to identify ways to increase private sector involvement. And in 2021, Joe Biden signed an executive order to advance educational equity, excellence, and economic opportunity through HBCUs, aimed to advance equity and economic and educational opportunities for all Americans, including Black Americans, thus creating a government-wide approach to support the needs of HBCUs and eliminate systemic barriers impeding their participation in federal programs. HBCUs have historically opened doors of opportunities for Black students, especially those face barriers to enrollment elsewhere. 10% of all Black students choose HBCUs. Among HBCU students, 88% attend four-year institutions, while 12% choose two-year institutions. Furthermore, 76% of HBCU students attend public institutions, with the remaining 24% selecting private nonprofit institutions. In terms of faculty, 72% belong to minority groups and 60% identify as Black. HBCUs hold the potential to address deeply rooted racial inequities in all of higher education. These institutions play a significant role in helping students overcome obstacles to success. They have a history of providing access to low-income, first-generation students and are among the top producers of Black baccalaureates and PhDs, graduates in STEM, medical, legal, business, pharmacy, veterinarian medicine, and military professions. In addition to their historical significance and academic achievements, HBCUs continue to attract students for a multitude of reasons. Legacy attachments, teacher encouragement, academic reputation, religion, a desire for connection and empowerment, cultural heritage, and racial interaction are just but a few factors that encourage HBCU enrollment. The current racial climate has also prompted new factors for enrollment, such as a desire for personal and physical safety, connection to Black culture, and of course, excellence. Preston and Palmer assert that attending HBCUs provides students with 6 forms of cultural capital: linguistic, aspirational, familial, social, navigation, and resistance. These institutions create a culturally safe environment where students can freely express themselves, fostering kinship-like relationships and networks that optimize their growth and success. Black HBCU graduates are likelier to report having experienced essential support measures during their education. Over half of all HBCU students experience upward mobility, making these institutions crucial in fostering mutual understanding among their students. HBCUs often enroll a larger share of low-income students than PWIs and propel many of them into high-income careers. Nathanson and others show evidence of upward mobility rates at HBCUs, and they are about 50% higher than students who graduate from predominantly white institutions driven by enrollment of low-income students. Xavier and Tuskegee University are examples of HBCUs that enroll more low-income students than other universities while achieving higher mobility rates. Historically, HBCUs have served many disadvantaged students in the nation, but face significant underfunding compared to historically white institutions. Recent efforts have been made to address these disparities with ongoing discussions about funding owed to HBCUs. While 1890 historically Black land-grant universities excel in meeting the land-grant mission, states are still failing to provide the nation's 1890 institutions with the same level of one-to-one matching dollars they provide other land-grant institutions that receive federal funding. As evidenced by last week's notice, governors of 16 states across the country, including Virginia, received letters from the U.S. Secretaries of Education and Agriculture for amounts owed to the 1890 land-grant institutions in excess of $13 billion total. For Virginia State University, the gap to be closed is estimated to be $277,544,416 million, and that's only accounting for 30 years. In the 2020-2021 school year, revenues for HBCUs totaled $12.4 billion, of which only $5.7 billion was received from federal, state, and local sources. This is alarming, given in the state of Virginia alone in 2020-2021, total revenue for four-year public institutions, total of 13, received $14.3 billion, of which about $3.5 billion was received from federal, state, and local sources. HBCUs face an ongoing challenge, including declining state and federal funding and limited endowments. And despite all of this, HBCU alumna continue to thrive and support their alma maters generously. The true stories of HBCUs goes far beyond what we see on the screen. These institutions have been instrumental in advancing education, fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion, as evidenced by the matriculation of non-Black students upwards of 25%, and promoting upward mobility for all of their students, all while confronting funding challenges and systemic disparities. The HBCU experience is complex. It is of culture, resilience, and achievement known intimately by those who have walked in its hallowed halls. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to keep this brief for a couple of reasons. I think your Q&As are going to be important. First, let me thank Governor Wilder for his stewardship of Howard University. He was a trustee when I took my position as president, and certainly has provided very sage advice ever since. So I do want to thank you publicly for that time. I'm going to talk about three things: opportunity, funding, and leadership as it pertains to HBCUs. On March 2nd, 1867, the 17th President of the United States, Andrew Johnson, signed into law the existence of Howard University. The Howard University is how the charter reads. And on that day that he signed the bill to create Howard University, he also signed a bill opposing the first Reconstruction Acts. He would go on to be the first United States president to be impeached. And that, among his other things of being a misogynist and an open racist, just goes to show you that our democracy is messy. So especially for the young people in the room who are becoming cynical about our democracy, I want to remind you that Howard University was started by an openly racist, openly misogynist president who would be impeached. So you must keep that in mind. Abraham Lincoln didn't sign the charter to start Howard University. Andrew Johnson did. So we must bear that in mind. That opportunity that was started on that day by the Freedmen's Bureau, funded by the Freedmen's Bureau, and the reason Howard University is named Howard University is because General Oliver Otis Howard, who ran Freedmen's Bureau, was the one who brought 16 other members of the Congressional Church together to start Howard University. He was an abolitionist, but what is very little known and spoken about his history is he also was the person that the government hired to go to the West to claim the lands of Native Americans. So we are all flawed in some way, which is the other thing that I want us to take away. We are not perfect. We have good intentions a lot of times, but as my mentor, Dr. Kanda, used to say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So we must keep that in mind as well. General Howard, for whom we were named after, had a vision to create an institution that would educate people moving from the South, provide an opportunity for freed slaves moving from the South to be educated at Howard University. Howard achieved that. But we talk about historically Black colleges and universities, as you heard Governor Wilder point out, and a lot of people aren't clear as to where that nomenclature came from. The reality is Howard's first motto was knowledge for all. And it featured 5 images on its logo of 5 men, because back then, unfortunately, our country was not accepting of women attending our higher institutions, 5 men of 5 different ethnicities. So I have to remind my alum when they tell me that Howard isn't Black enough, that when Howard was started, it was not intended only for Black people. It was intended to provide an opportunity for all those who did not have an opportunity. And that's why its initial logo had 5 people of different ethnicities. Historically, Black colleges and universities is a nomenclature that was started as a result of an amendment to the Higher Education Act in the 1960s. And to qualify as a historically Black college and university, you have to have had a mission that was committed to the education of formerly enslaved people in the 1800s. So if I were to start a university today and brought all the Black intellects together and only admitted Black people, the federal government would not necessarily call me an HBCU or fund me that way. And that's the other part of our nomenclature that I think is also something that we don't understand as a people. The other thing about opportunity that I want you to keep in mind is that in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, when Japanese Americans and Jewish Americans could not get into higher ed institutions in this country, they attended our HBCUs. we were welcoming to them. So the other thing about Black excellence that I hope that you always remember is that it never takes away the opportunity from everybody else. It is has always been inclusive of the opportunity for all people of all races, ethnicities, and country of origin. And that's something that I think our HBCUs do not claim enough credit for. So when I travel the country and people ask me, how do you have a Black university, an exclusive Black university? I tell them, come and walk the hallways of the med school with me. Look at the pictures of the graduates and their names and see how many of them are named Goldberg, etc. And that's because, like I said, Jewish Americans had a safe haven at our medical school, our dental school, our law school. And I'm sure Governor Wilder can tell stories about his Jewish classmates who had an opportunity to go to law school because they could not have attended law school anywhere else in this country. Funding. The endowment at Harvard University is $50 billion. If Harvard University were to use its spending rule of 5% and put $2.5 billion into its operating budget every year as it does, it can actually take that $2.5 billion and run 2 Howard universities. Right, let me put that in perspective for you and repeat that. The entire revenue at Howard University today is roughly $1.25 billion to educate 13,000 students. A law school, a med school, a dental school, a radio station, a TV station, a hospital, 19 Division I sports, one of the most complex organizations you can find in this country. As a matter of fact, there are probably only 2 other schools in this country that have the complexity of offerings as Howard University does. And there's an institution in this country, higher ed, that can take 5% of its endowment and run 2 Howard universities. And when I say run, let me be clear. Nobody would pay tuition. They would pay every employee's salary, every faculty's salary. They'd be able to pay the president's salary on just 5% of their endowment. Howard University's endowment by January of 2024, if not June of 2024, will be the first endowment at a historically Black college and university to reach $1 billion. And that will be quite an achievement. But let's just be very clear about what that gap in funding means. And as a result of that gap in funding, what it does for opportunity. And on that opportunity, to put it in perspective, right here in Virginia, all of the medical schools in Virginia collectively graduated less African-American physicians last year from their medical schools than Howard University did. Howard University actually sent more African-Americans to medical school than any other school in this country. But that was only 105 students. In a country of 300 million people, we send the largest number of African-Americans to medical school than anybody else in the country, a country of 300 million people. So think about sending 100 Black students to medical school in a country of 300 million people, and that one institution with an endowment just less than $1 billion sent more than anybody else in this country. So we do have a crisis. We have a crisis of opportunity, and we have a crisis of funding. One of the solutions for that crisis is leadership. And I would say to you, as the President Emeritus of Howard, 3 weeks in, so now I can say whatever I want to say. And having been a triple alum of Howard, right? I have a BS in zoology, an MD degree, and an MBA, all from Howard University. My observation about leadership is one of the most critical things for our HBCUs. And why do I feel that way? When I started my presidency, the average tenure for university presidents in this country was about 9 years. Today, it's down to 5.6. For HBCU presidents, it's down to 2.8 years. Think of what type of leadership for a complex institution like higher education institutions are, can even find the closet in 2.8 years, far less solve the most complicated problems an institution might be facing. And that leadership problem goes to governance as well. And governance is a very misunderstood issue at our higher education institutions. Our institutions are like cars. The president is the driver and has the steering wheel. The board of trustees are sitting in the back seat, and they are to provide guidance as to whether or not you turn left or you turn right. When you stop at a gas station, they're there to get better gas for you, premium preferably. They're there to help you change the tires, get a new carburetor. What they are not there to do, but what they often do in HBCU world, because they don't have access to the resources, but they are good operators, they tend to want to operate the car. And what happens? They pull the steering wheel. What happens when somebody pulls the steering wheel if you're driving? You're going to pull it back and you're going to get in an accident. And so those accidents occur frequently. So I would argue that one of the key solutions for our HBCUs to thrive as we go into the future is to take a hard look at leadership. Harvard University in its past 10 presidents have had one president unwillingly not serve 10 years. One. And you all know him. Larry Summers said something very inappropriate and as a result ended his presidency. The point is that when those well-resourced institutions pick leaders, they get behind them and they stay with them for those 10 years because that stability of leadership in and of itself brings a certain success. What do we do in HBCU world? We say that guy has an accent. He wasn't born here. He doesn't understand the culture. I came here as a 16-year-old, and I don't think you could get a better education of Black American life than on Howard University's campus. But yet still, we spend so much time in our HBCU community criticizing our presidents as opposed to supporting them, that we create a dynamic that does not breed success. And I'm here to tell you that that leadership and governance is a key aspect of what we must do differently as we go. In 100 years at Howard University, we have not transitioned the presidency well. We celebrated our 150th anniversary in 2017. Not a single living past president attended. Think of how storied an institution Howard University is. Not one single past president, not one of my successors attended a single ceremony on that campus to celebrate the 150th anniversary because they all left unwillingly. They all left unhappy. That should never happen. So I'm here to tell you, I left willingly. I left happily. I have not stopped smiling since I left. And I have transitioned that presidency well. And I'm here to tell you that the 18th president of Howard University is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ben Vincent III. He's a known Black Latino diaspora academic. And if you ever meet him, please make sure you provide him your full support. Thank you for your attention.
I have to be cognizant of the time because in my environment, we give lawyers a limited amount of time and a red light comes on and you have to stop. Dr. Frederick, I like what you said. I want you to know that I ended my tenure as chief happy and willingly. Yeah, just for the record. Well, first of all, I just want to say this, that with this esteemed panel, I can't help but think about one of my favorite books called The Tin Drum. In the line, it says that fools and dwarfs like me should not be made to dance on concrete that was poured for giants. And these are giants here. So I'm just gonna, as they say in the Baptist church, I'm gonna do what I have to do and move out the way. I am. And then pass the collection. We are talking about funding. We are talking about funding. No, seriously, I just want to say my part is mainly to talk about being an incredible, thankful, just incredibly grateful, overjoyed recipient of the blessings and the grace of a historically Black college, Virginia State University. And like the governor, I wouldn't be standing here but for Virginia State. And I'm going to tell you why in a minute. But before that, I just want to, because first of all, I'm a federal judge. I have no political view. You know that, none at all. Did I say that right? No political view at all, at all, at all, at all, at all, at all. But I want to talk about just a little bit about when you talk about funding and how we got there. It's an incredible in terms of, you can understand when the laws purposely leaves you out or doesn't mention you, or it was not in the category, but when the law was supposedly there to protect you, how it was interpreted and what the impact is. Just briefly, is the 1862 Act. Now, please remember this. Particularly, I mean, for African Americans, everybody, but particularly, Justin Smith Morrill was an incredible human being. 1862, the war is going on. And before that, in 1857, he got the bill passed. And the object was to help the common man / woman, and to give them an opportunity to have access to education from agriculture and mechanical arts. And since there was a war going on, military tactics as well as classic education. And he thought it should be for everyone, Black and white. And by the way, President Buchanan vetoed the bill in 1857. That just happened to be the same year that Dred Scott came out. Same year that Dred Scott came out, and I don't have to go through that insidious, this incredible opinion, but he vetoed it. But Morrill was insistent. So he came back with his bill in 1862 and it passed. And I'm not going to repeat because you heard in terms of the grant. But here's the thing. When the states got the money and had the land grant schools, they wouldn't admit Black people. He was dismayed by that. So he said, again, I'm going back for a second iteration of this bill. So in 1890, he said this: you can't get the funds, you meaning the states that are land granted colleges, unless you stop discriminating on the base of race. But Congress, there was pushback. Well, I don't know. We got to do so. So a compromise was reached. And here's the compromise. You don't have to comply with that if you establish a school in your state, land grant college, for Black people. And they did that. But I want to read the language to you for that exception in the law. Read how it words out. Here's the exception. You be in compliance if you do this. But the establishment and the maintenance, the establishment and the maintenance of such colleges separately for whites and colored students shall be held to be in compliance. In other words, this is the exception to the rule that you can't discriminate. You can open up a school for Negroes or colored people, whichever you want to use, whichever hue you want to put the appellation on. But this is the way you have to be in compliance. It shall be in compliance with the provision of this act if part of one of the most important words in statutes, if the exception, if the funds received in such states, those are the states that have now opted rather than to not discriminate we're going to call out a Negro school for land grant. If you do that, that's such states, or the such, it refers to the predecedent of the states that are actually trying to get a exception for the compliance. Got to follow this statutory aspect. States or territory, they must be equitably divided as hereafter set forth. That's what it said. If you choose this, it must be equitably divided. Now, just before they did that, 3 years earlier in 1887, there was the Hatch Act. Not the Hatch Act a lot of people know about that, prohibits, not that one, this one earlier than that one. But the Hatch Act said the 1862 schools can have appropriations for agricultural experimental stations. That's just a fancy word for research labs in agriculture, right? That's 3 years earlier. But the interpretation was this. It only applied to the 1862 schools, not the 1890 schools. And they did not correct that until 90 years later, when Evans-Allen Act came. 90 years not complying with equitable divided caused that. That's incredible. Not being left out, but the letters of the law itself talked about equitable. And they did not get any funds for 90 years until in 1977, Evans-Allen came along. And then then you look at Smith versus Lever, Smith-Lever Act. That was 1914. Now that's for laboratories for land grant. You got to do your research, right? That's for research. 1914, a law was passed to allow extensions. That's when you go out into the hustings and help farmers and do those things. That'll be $50 if we're in court. No. I'm just a joke. No, but so the monies that will allow you to have extension programs, and that was the whole purpose that Morrow wanted, not only to educate common folk, but to make it accessible to the community, so you would go out and teach and just enhance the community. Those funds, then the statute says, these funds will go to the land grant schools of the states. So the interpreter be, each state decided which one land grant was going to be, and guess which one it was not. It was not the 1891. So then that went on for 83 years until it was corrected. Research funds 90 years, extension, and extension funds 83 years. So when someone talks about that, this is talking about the rule of law. We're not talking about charity. We're talking about funding based on the rule of law. It doesn't take any political view. It's common sense, American democracy, and the rule of law. To be upended like that with sort of contorted interpretation. But my point is this, not to recrimination, if you will, but to give you an aspect that you don't bow your head in the sense that this is some charity, this is what the law required. This is what Morrill and Abraham Lincoln wanted in 1862. Not given. Now, what I want to say is this. In spite of those things, historically Black colleges and universities were able to make bricks without straw, because they were able to have monumental achievements. And you hear just professions and all of those things, and just incredible extension. Like in Virginia State, we had laboratory schools. Anybody know what a laboratory school was? Right. They ran high schools. So look, they understood, look, we teach, and while we're teaching, our students can then teach in the laboratory schools. And a wonderful, I saw a picture recently of high school graduates in the Petersburg area. Those were from Virginia State, historically Black colleges who were, in spite of a mandate of bricks without straw, did those things. Incredible. And when it talks about equitable, I think of this old story about the old farmer who was making sausage, rabbit sausage. And perhaps somebody who was envious of his success, tipped off the authorities about it. It looked like they was putting some impurities and something non-rabbit meat in there. So the authorities came to him and said, yes, understand you're making rabbit sausage, and there's been a complaint about that. And you know, the law says 50%, at least 50% has to be rabbit. You call it rabbit sausage. And the farmer looked at him and said, I ain't worried about that. I do this myself. And I can tell you it is because when I do every bat, I put in one rabbit and one horse. That is what the history has been in terms of calculating these statutes, what equitable is. So we're had to do this with just one rabbit. My goodness, just one rabbit, all but they ran with that rabbit. And I can tell you right now, I'm a recipient of how they ran. That's not bragging about me. I'm not all that in a bag of chips. I'm just someone who happened to be there to benefit from it. And just real quickly, in terms of my experience at Virginia State, first of all, my high school government teacher, Mr. Leon T. Harrison, who's gone on to glory, see, we created in high school, No Child Left Behind. He took me to Virginia State, met with Dr. Calvin Miller, who was the chair of political science department. We sat down and talked. When we left the room, I had a half tuition scholarship to Virginia State. See, it's not about me being there and all in the bag of chips. It's about people who cared and understood the mission of historically Black colleges. Yeah, and then when I went there, Dr. Miller was just awesome. I mean, he was out in the hustings in terms of, I met Governor Wilder for the first time, and the governor was nice. So he had been senator. It took us down where the caucus was. We were on the floor, and I was this little kid from Petersburg with goosebumps. It was to see all of these people who were just reacting and doing incredible things. And he taught us about what politics is. See, I don't have a political view, but I'm a political science major. This is academic. It's academic, because it said what he taught us is that politics is, when it's distilled in its distilled form, is really simply this. It's the art and science of distributing power and resources. Whether it's in an entity, a city, county, state, or the nation. It's the art of distributing resources and power. And people try to make it all about us. I'm just, no, that's what it is. And that's why the funding and those things in terms of interpretation and understanding. But Virginia State didn't care about that because their assignment was more important than what their acceptance was. I mean, don't forget that. Don't let people's assessment of you change your assignment. That's so important. So when I was there at Virginia State, then guess what I did, y'all? I'm gonna brag about Virginia State real quick. 1972, I'm a sophomore. I don't know how Dr. Miller did this, but he found the funds somewhere. I went to President Johnson's Civil Rights Symposium at the University of Texas. This little boy that said, everybody was there in the civil rights movement except for Dr. King, because he had been slain years earlier. Met the president, and on the plane was a chartered plane. It was my first plane ride. Chief Justice Earl Warren was on the plane. Former Vice President Hubert Humphrey, Ramsey Clark, former Attorney General. I mean, Clarence Mitchell and Perrin Mitchell's brother. Just incredible. And you know what happened is there? A little fracas with Roy Ennis was there in terms of core, and something came up, and President Johnson kind of calmed people down. He put something in his mouth, And I noticed that he did that, but what it was nitroglycerin. He was dying, literally dying right there. And he died, his doctors had warned him not to come, but he said, look, this is my civil rights symposium. I'm going to be there in Austin. And he did. He died in the next month in January. But I met Barbara Jordan. She had just been elected to Congress. That January, she would get a prize assignment, Judiciary Committee. Sam Rayburn was very powerful from Texas. And you know the rest is history in terms of people said, who is this woman from Texas? A constitutional scholar. Awesome, awesome, awesome. But that's what I was exposed to at Virginia State. Those kind of things. 2 years I went to Harvard Model United Nations. Again, I don't know whether the funds and grants they did it, but it was a competition. We were the only historically Black college there. That was my great debater story. And we debated, did those things like that. But the point is we came back with some honors, but it was just an incredible experience. And lastly, the big thing at Virginia State was this. I had L. Douglas Wilder as my constitutional law professor for 2 classes. It was unbelievable. That's what inspired me to go to law school. That's what inspired me to go to law school. Where else I could not have done the things I did in undergrad anywhere else at any place in America. What I was able to do. My senior thesis was presented at the National Conference of Black Social Scientists and Political Scientists down at Johnson C. Smith. Again, historically Black college. All these incredible threads, but Senator Wilder, it was just unbelievable. I mean, the things he taught, and I must say, he was really unfair to us. And I didn't realize how unfair he was until I got to law school. When I saw the law school exam, I said, this is the same thing he's been given in undergrad. It's not fair. But he knew that when we got there, we had, whatever we were going to do, we had to respond and be there. That's the thing that historically Black college has always done. It's not about where you are, it's where you're going. It's what's in your heart and your courage and your spirit. And that's what he did. And 10 years later, we became law partners. 10 years later, see, when he did some charity work. We got there, and I'm gonna end up because I'm gonna stop because he's got the summation, and I know how powerful he is on closing arguments. So I'm gonna get out of the way. But the point is this, it's the funding and those kind of things, they're important. States matching those things, because the monumental achievements of historically Black colleges is unbelievable. And they did with one rabbit, got their own straw and made incredible bricks. And those bricks are still, there's walls, they're walls. And they're holding in a lot of spirit and hope. And I am not, as Dr. King said, we may have some difficult days ahead, but I'm not worried about that now. I still believe that the spirit and the hope and what's going on at all these historically Black colleges and other colleges as well. The idea is not to reduce funding and appropriation from other schools. We need that. But I'm talking about the fair share that the law said that was delayed some 90 years in one and 83 in another. Now the time to do right is always now. The place is always here, and the person is always you. God bless.
It is always hard to be last after the incredible presentations that have been here. And in fact, when Governor Wilder called to invite me, he said, "Mr. Attorney General, do you believe in free speech?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "Congratulations, you're giving one." So here I am. That definitely, though, for me, as somebody that I have often felt that you can learn so much from your past and studying the past. And for me, one of those pinch me moments for me, shortly after I was sworn in
as Attorney General. Governor Wilder is not a very patient man, so I think it was probably the first day or two I was in office, actually. My staff came in and said, Governor Wilder wants to see you, which immediately I felt like I was being called in the principal's office. Why was a Virginia legend wanting to see me? A living Virginia legend, and as somebody that knows our history and was a child in Virginia from that historic moment where Governor Wilder, I think, displayed the very, very best of Virginia when he won his historic election. I was a little bit intimidated, candidly. But I can tell now, I now know why he's a professor. I did not know that. But Governor Wilder sat down with me and really laid out in a very persuasive way the historical injustice of what has happened in Virginia. And that is always a challenge when someone looks in the eye and says, what are you going to do about that? And so we promptly went to work in my office, and as Governor Wilder noted, it was actually one of my earliest, was only the second Attorney General opinion that I was issued from my office, was noting that yes, indeed, Virginia law does allow the state to support our HBCUs. It's been noted a little bit about my background. But if you're a child of an immigrant, you are raised to revere that education is the doorway to the American dream. And our HBCUs have been emerged from the very, very worst of America at a horrific chapters in our nation's history. I thought, Dr. Frederick, you noted something, and I actually wrote this down in your remarks. HBCUs were to provide an opportunity for those who previously had no opportunity. Again, I am a student of history, and I think it's poignant that a representative from Howard University is here, given the connection that Howard has to some of the great giants in Virginia history. Obviously, we know of Spotswood Robinson. We know of course, Governor Wilder receiving his law degree. But one of the greatest Virginians who's ever lived that's sometimes lost in history, John Mercer Langston, elected to Congress in 1888, the first African-American elected to Congress from Virginia. Despite the fact that he was duly elected, those in power refused to seat him. For 18 months, he had to wait to be seated in the House of Representatives. Not only was he the first dean of the law school at Howard, but he was the first president at Virginia State University. So it is poignant that we are standing here to have this discussion, and we have that natural collection. Now, we have this moment, and it has been noted, the injustice that has happened over the decades, the gross inequities of the funding, the disparity of the funding between our land-grant institutions. But we are also at an interesting moment in Virginia because we recognize the unique opportunity HBCUs drive in providing, first of all, opportunity for Virginians. We want to be the talent state. We want to bring in the best and brightest from around the country to come to Virginia, and we want our best and brightest to stay. HBCUs can be and should be, when we look at education, one of the great economic drivers of the Commonwealth. Hampton University's Proton Therapy Institute is a national leader in cancer treatment. If you've not had a chance to tour it and visit, please do. The nursing programs at Hampton and Norfolk State and Virginia State are not just valuable, they're desperately needed because we have this twin vortex of an aging population and a nationwide nursing shortage. Hampton University wants to start a medical school, and I applaud them. And I'm going to do everything and work with the administration to help them do so. The remarkable moment we are as a nation and in Virginia is whereas nationally, you're seeing student enrollment drop nationally for traditional universities by 10%. Enrollment at HBCUs are up 30%. So there's a desire and a need. Now, it's easy for me to issue an AG's opinion in some ways and say, listen, this is what the law is. The question is, does that get translated into action? We have a long way to go. There's no doubt. But I'm also proud of the work that we've done in this last budget. It's been messaged by the judge about rabbit sausage. By the way, it's always intimidating for me to possibly have my back turned to a judge. It's just, as a lawyer, I just start sweating thinking that. So, and they say that the two things, Mark Twain said, the two things you never want to see being made is legislation and sausage, right? And we finally got a budget. It was done a little way later than normal, but it was done. But I am proud of what I saw that Governor Youngkin do in the investments in HBCUs. It's a long way to go to correct the historical injustice. But 10 years ago, the average state funding per in-state student at Virginia State was $12,400. And this year budget that just got signed in September is going to be $31,900. So that's an extraordinary increase. It does not make up for the decades and decades of inequities and improper funding imbalances, but it is a step in the right direction. And I think we're at this moment where we should also recognize where we fail, but we should also cheer when we start getting on that right path. And so I'm proud that we are on that right path. The hard part is to continue it. Recognize that this could be a wonderful driver of our economic engine, but it also means that we can't quit and we can't stop. We have to advance towards our goal. In other words, we're just getting started. It's an honor to be here, to be part of this. And I would love to, I guess, begin the panel discussion, but thank you all so much for hosting me. And Governor Wilder, thank you for hosting me as well.
We have some time for panel discussion, and typically and historically what we've done is that we've asked Governor Wilder to provide the first question to whoever you'd like to provide it.
Well, what I would like to do, is it on?
Yes.
I want to first of all thank the panelists and you too, Doctor, for hitting the ball. Question is, how far can we hit it? And the question that I would raise is how best you see that we would be able to follow through in Virginia with implementing what the Attorney General's opinion has said as it relates to no hindrance. And as you know, Dr. Holsworth, you heard on so many occasions, and people would say it, legislators would say it, we can't give any money. And you mean, you have the money, is it taxpayers' money? Is it for education? But you can't give it to black schools? Well, yes, some of them, but well, we can give some to Virginia State, but even that's disparate. So my question to the panel is, how do you think, what more can we do from a legal standpoint to bring about some degree of compliance with what's right?
I guess the right people to answer that first are the two lawyers. And I guess I would ask the Attorney General, so you also spoke about what might be done with the private colleges as well. So if you could talk about that, and then a little bit later, I might have a specific question about Virginia State.
Right. Well, one of the things that we looked at when the AG's opinion is we obviously have Hampton University, which is a private HBCU, and they actually view themselves as a real HU, just so you know, Doctor. No offense. I don't know if we have any pirates here. There you go. All right. They have a great rivalry with this. Any Spartans in the house? Don't forget to say. Yes, sir. All right. Behold the green and gold. Outstanding. But particularly when it was coming to our private HBCUs, how do we find a path forward that they can get state funding. And what we found through our AG's opinion interpretation is yes, we were able to get direct state aid when it was tied to the students, and also serve in many ways as the borrower. The Virginia College Building Authority could serve as essentially the bank of first resort for building projects as well. So we were able to get an enormous amount of money to our private HBCUs after we issued the AG's opinion. It then was incumbent upon those in the General Assembly, which is divided government. So I give credit to both parties for working through this. And then it got to the governor's desk. But we were able to increase the TAG grant for students from $5,000 to $2,500 per student. So more than doubled, which I thought was significant. We had a chance to visit at Hampton with the general, and he was very, very appreciative and has already seen, I think, a huge impact of the work that they've done in Richmond. There's a lot more to go though. And I think that's the key. Is I think a lot of this is recognize where we were, where we are now, and then laying the groundwork for the future.
Yeah, well, you've heard from the lawyer. And as a judge, I'll say this, Governor, you is always a poignant question. But I would say that I may talk to you later, but I wouldn't want to be recused if you come up with something that might come to my court. Because I'm neutral. I stay neutral. I stay neutral. So I don't, but I just, for one thing, from a historical standpoint, from a legal standpoint, you might look at this and you can check, of course, this is just fact of law. But I believe when Virginia first got their land grant monies in 1890s, they did not give it to Virginia State. It went to Hampton, which was a private school. So, so there is precedent in that standpoint that the footprint can be broader than what the feet that have been placed in it for these number of years. So I think there's creativity and legal history precedent in that sense, but I don't think I have anything further on that.
Let me ask Frederick about this as well. If a state begins to make these kind of compensation for what it's done in the past and begins to fund more equitably the HBCUs, how should that funding go in your mind? Is it just programs, buildings, student support? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, sure. Actually, while I'm not a lawyer, I probably slept at a Holiday Inn last night, so I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable opining on this. There actually is precedent in the federal law for this, so I actually don't think it's a far-fetched idea. Howard University is one of two non-military educational institutions that receives money in the federal appropriation budget. The other being Gallaudet, which means that there's federal law that allows for the disposition of funds to two private institutions that are located in Washington, D.C. And it's a significant amount of money that's allocated every year to both institutions. And that goes all the way back to an act in 1923 in Congress. It's one of the reasons why both schools have the bison as their mascot, because the money is issued through the Department of Interior, whose mascot is the bison. So there's law already on the books that allows for that to happen without any type of confusion. That's one. Two, the best gift that you can give to anyone, and this has been shown, and I think there's a lot of data in terms of alleviating poverty. There has been a lot of discussion on how do you alleviate poverty, and the best opportunity to alleviate poverty is to give people money. And every time that we've done that, we assume that people without money will not make responsible decisions, and that isn't true. The data does show that if you give someone money who needs it, they actually spend it more wisely than the people who don't need it. And I mention that because I think no gift of money granted to any institution of this kind should be designated. The best gift that Howard University has ever received was the $40 million from Mackenzie Scott. I got a call from her, I got an email from somebody who was acting on her behalf. I called that person. I sent an email back and said I could talk to you at 3 p.m. It was a very nondescript email. I got on the phone with the person. They said, I represent someone who wants to give a significant gift to Howard. I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. You know, thinking this is a spam, the person, I checked the person's office, it's a PO box number, nothing about it was normal. But I could just feel that there was something different about this. 17 days later, a wire came to Howard University for $40 million. I don't have a donor agreement. I've never met the woman or spoken to her. And I said, what can I use the money for? She said, whatever you want. And I joked and said, what if I just raise everybody's salary? She said, well, we've been looking at what you've been doing and you've been very responsible. If you think that's what the university needs, then that's what you do. Well, I still have a copy of that wire in the top drawer at my desk. Because that totally allows you to do what you need to do. When you give designated funds and you say, go build a building or do this or do that, you really hamstring an organization from doing what it is they need to do. And I think that type of giving hopefully will become the mainstream type of giving. It will have some legal ramifications because I didn't do a background check on her. I don't know if she's a serial killer or not. But as my dear mentor, Gwyneth Jordan would say, just find out where you can get more of it.
Not sure that I can. $40 million is a lot. I think for us, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a public administrator and thinking about this from an equity perspective. And so when we want to look at how do we take what has now been set as legal precedents, the job then becomes who's responsible for ensuring that these institutions get the funds that they need. And so where I would be interested in this process is really what is the mechanism? What's the organizing arm that's going to ensure that this resources gets there and also gets there swiftly? So when I read the figure of $277 million, a lot of money, you know, to have been waiting for this for more than 30 years. And so how do we make sure that the HBCUs now are a priority come January 1st, give you a little bit of time, January 1st, and then to ensure that these funds are there and so that those institutions taking the lead from Dr. Frederick's comments, that the institutions themselves then get to decide how those funds are distributed, whether to the students or within the institutional framework.
I have trouble operating heavy equipment, so I apologize. No, but I thought the point I think was excellent was the $40 million gift was a force multiplier because it did not come with strings. And I think that is a great message for people in state government to, where possible, trust those on our campuses, our HBCUs, to know where to best spend it. I also think that, listen, I worked all 4 years in college. And I was able to go through college because we were at a time where tuition was not increasing at a rapid rate. And so I could plan, and I could figure out what I could make during the school year and the summers, and I could take out some loans, and I graduated with not too much debt. And so one thing I do appreciate about what is in the budget with the tuition assistance grants is it goes directly to the student, because graduating with an enormous amount of debt, it limits your opportunities. And so I think it's so important. We should have in Virginia where a student, whether it's an HBCU or a state school, they're able to attend a four-year institution, get a degree, go chase their dream, and then not constantly be worrying about how they're going to cover their student loan payments. And I saw it as a law student, students that gave up dreams of working for nonprofits, going to working at these law firms that work 80 hours a week because they felt like they just had to pay off the loans. So I think that's an important part as well when you look at this dynamic.
I was going to say, I think it also creates a sense of liberation for Black students that we've never had before. Speaking of Attorney General's point, when we think about college, we think about having to go to make a better life, not just for ourselves, but also for our families. And so resources like this pulling into the student and not just the institution allows that student to come to school with a different mindset and the way that they can think about what is it that I want for my future, for my family, and not being burdened by, is it going to also pay me enough to make a living?
Here's a question from the audience. And I'll direct this first to Dr. Frederick. How do you think the Supreme Court ruling that colleges and universities cannot take race into account in admissions will either help or hurt HBCUs?
Yeah, so I'm definitely a skeptic on this issue. I think there's a lot of conversation going on around the country that we'll see more applications, we'll have more students, et cetera. And I'm not in that camp. As a matter of fact, I think this is one of the most destructive decisions that have been made. Howard University received 34,000 applications last year for an incoming class of 2,500 students. We don't need any more applications. The average GPA for those students is over 3.7. It's getting to a point where I may not get into Howard if I apply. So that's not an issue, and I think it's a false thought to think that this is going to create some kind of a boom for or HBCUs. I think that's a mistaken, and the biggest display of this is in our medical school. We received 11,000 applications in our medical school, and we took in a class of 126 students. That's a 1% enrollment rate in our medical school. So the issue is not the number of applications that we get. The issue is what type of funding difference we're going to have to support them. And I hear people talk about, making community colleges free and those types of conversations. The reality still is, I think there are two things that we have to be cognizant of. Can we get those students through the system? So the Bloomberg gift to Howard of $34.8 million that allowed us to reduce the debt of students by 100,000. Again, one of the greatest gifts that we received, because we had more students take a chance, go into neurosurgery, to urology, where you have to train, for 9 years. I mean, when I graduated from Howard's medical school, I graduated with a $4,000 zero interest loan from Howard to be able to walk. I would train for 9 years subsequent to that and only pay that loan off because I'm married. When I proposed to my wife, she wanted to see my finances. So basically said, you're irresponsible if you have a $4,000 0% interest loan that you didn't pay off. But the point is, in terms of managing the two things, you're not likely to go into, especially if it takes longer if you don't. And then the second issue, just to get back to why funding HBCUs is critical. Yes, we can put some money into student support. I'm supportive of that. But one of the things we have to be very careful of is that we do not have the infrastructure to continue to participate in very high-end technology. And I think our students deserve that. But we also underpay our faculty. Let's be very clear. I think that's the other thing that does happen. We have to work that. Last year, Howard University gave a 21% increase to faculty. I saw some faculty who not only taught me, who were getting paid probably less than 10% of my salary. And they had been there for decades. And so that underfunding of the faculty as well is something that we appreciate the support they give, that they go above and beyond, but that's their service. You've got to pay them, compensate them well, so that they can also continue to be motivated and participate.
I'm going to put one more question out there, and I'm going to put one more question to Dean Gooden on the spot, and then we'll allow everybody to have some final comments. So Dean Gooden, as recently there's been a lot of conversation about universities cannibalizing other universities due to their inherent desire to grow. How has predominantly white universities both armed and helped HBCUs, and what should predominantly white universities do to collaborate better with HBCUs?
So first of all, let me say, I think that I want to go back to a point that Attorney General Miyares raised about overall enrollment going down nationally by 10% after the pandemic, but going up 33% across HBCUs. That is an invisible statistic because it's not publicized. People don't talk about it. It's almost like it's an asterisk. You talk about enrollment and they say, oh yeah, enrollment's going down, except at the elite universities. And it's as if HBCUs do not even exist. And so what predominantly white institutions have to understand, particularly those that are having enrollment challenges, is that if we go back to like the 1960s, 95% of all African-Americans who had an education received it from an HBCU, 95%. So those statistics went down, of course, after integration and after African-Americans were able to have more choice among universities. Now we're finding that the pendulum is swinging back and that the first choice institutions for many African-American families and their students are HBCUs. Predominantly white institutions should be concerned about that because it's no longer enough to give lip service to things like diversity and desire to increase faculty. That lip service is not going to carry the day because the choices that African-American students now they are now saying, because I think about a book that President Emeritus Harvey wrote on historically Black colleges and universities. You have to understand what these universities provide. Not only are they providing a top tier education, not only are they graduating 25% of the STEM graduates of African-Americans across the nation, they're building character. They're building communal responsibility. It didn't just happen that we had civil rights legislation. It was because of Howard Law School and the graduates that they produced, that you produced someone like a Thurgood Marshall and folks that could advance the legal argument. Is that communal responsibility? When Prince Edward County schools closed for many years, it was the students at Virginia State University who came and helped tutor those students in Prince Edward County who were denied an education that they were lawfully entitled to by the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I think it's very important for predominantly white institutions to understand that African-American families are voting with their feet, they're voting with their pocketbooks, and in many instances, they're voting to go to HBCUs.
Thank you to all the panelists for their final thoughts. It's been an extraordinary session. Presentation has been remarkable. Very, very fortunate to have everybody here. And if I could start with the Attorney General.
I want to both thank for the opportunity, but also for the discussion. And just to kind of piggyback what was just said, I think we have a real opportunity, and some schools that are going to be ahead of the game are going to recognize this opportunity. When you're having a drop in enrollment, when you're seeing an increase at HBCUs, the question is, the schools that are wise enough to partner are going to take advantage. For example, I was at Appalachian School of Law out in Southwest Virginia. They've started a partnership with Norfolk State, where you can essentially cut off a year, 18 months off your education. If you know you want to be an attorney, you could go straight from Norfolk State at Appalachian and cut off a full 18 months. Normally it's 4 years undergrads, 3 years of law school. And I think universities would be incredibly astute to recognize this moment. And I like to say at some point, the market's going to direct the reaction. The question, are the universities wise enough, the traditional universities wise enough? Listen, we need to partner with HBCUs where possible. And Appalachian is one example, but you can have those moments. But again, I think this is an inflection point for us to recognize where we've been, where we are, and we have a long way to go.
Struck by your commentary about your own experience. I thought that every university ought to be able to do for undergraduates what BSU used to do.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for letting me be a part of this panel. Governor Wilder, Dr. Good, and Bob, just a great job, and fellow panelists. I would say this, you know, it's you can't be who you should be until you stop being who you've become. You'll get that on the way home. And stop being who you have become requires recognition. I think that the key is in terms of funding, because it's since that vision doesn't follow resources, resources follow vision. And having the vision and understand and recognize the accomplishment of historically Black colleges and universities, incredible contribution in what they have done with these seemingly insurmountable odds, will let you know that these are some of the finest institutions in the land. And if you look at it, they have subsidized the progress of this nation. I say it again, they have subsidized. If there was a welfare system, it is the other way around, because in spite of not having those things, they have produced the people who have contributed to the progress of this nation. Pound for pound, we're punching above our weight. So my point is this: once you recognize that, then you will fund it not because it's charitable, you'll fund it because it's existential to your existence. And I think that is what will be the key to opening the doors to funding, in terms of understanding and recognizing that. And people want to put, I would think, dollars in places that have been successful and just absolutely incredible. You know, I just had a law clerk from Howard University leave me. One of the finest law clerks I've ever had. Unbelievable, incredible. Thank you, Dr. Frederick, in terms of your leadership at Howard. No school has made a greater contribution to making our Constitution a living and meaningful document for recognizing the rights and civil liberties of all Americans. And that's owed to historically Black college. And the funding should follow where success has been. And I think that's the key. I think that's really the key, is to take perseverance. But the reality of the truth is that we need to become better and recognize that as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you also for the invitation to be here tonight. I think taking away from this, one of the things that we really need to understand and can look at is really the role that HBCUs play in understanding higher education for all of our systems. I was struck by all of the research and preparing for this evening, and looking at not just the contributions that HBCUs are making for Black students, but also other students of color and white students. 25% of students who attend HBCUs are not Black students. And so when we think about, again, our diversity agenda, when we think about the things that we're trying to do here at historically white institutions, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from those institutions. When we think about our policies for recruiting faculty, when we think about our policies for recruiting administrators, there are 60% of Black faculty at HBCUs. And I think Governor Walker said we're still hovering around 6% at many historically white institutions. And so really thinking about what are the practices that are in place that keep faculty of color, particularly at those institutions. We know that Black students are going to these institutions, or excuse me, all students of color are going to HBCUs because there's something highly regarded in those faculty. And so are there things that we can take a look at for us to be able to improve the environment for faculty, staff, and students at historically white institutions?
Dr. Frederick, want to thank you for coming in. Sure. Three things. First, I apologize. I've been checking my phone because my 17-year-old daughter is the captain of the volleyball team, and they were involved in a very tight game. That was the fifth set. I'm happy to report that she won. I don't think speaking can be the best on Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons, but since the governor called, I had to come. But part of that was being sure my wife kept me aggressive as so. You know, on April 1st, 1950, Charles Andrew died in a tragic accident on his way taking students from Howard University to a conference in the South after an accident in North Carolina passed.
I am comfortable that the child that we taught share, he was a chair state during the time I was there. I still operate, I still have patients this morning, will operate next week. I mentioned that because he had a saying that anyone who trained in that department to this day still lives by. And I think it's important when you think of HBCUs, and that is that excellence of performance will transcend all artificial barriers created by man. We're not here having a discussion about mediocrity. I want to be very, very clear about that. We're here having a discussion about institutions that epitomize excellence. I tell students all the time, when you come to a public university, you get a D, you earned it. There's no dispute as to whether or not you earned that D. You earned it. There's no dispute about where you came from, who your parents are, color of your skin. If you did not perform in an excellent fashion, we let you know it. And so these institutions are all excellent. And so this issue of whether the fundamental is not an issue of trying to create something out of nothing. These institutions have done well, but the key is that they have to continue to be excellent. We don't want funding just because. We want funding because we are excellent. And the second thing, or the last thing I'd like you to think about is this. All governments and higher education institutions are here for the purpose of amplifying other people's humanity. And I want to be clear about that, not respecting other people's humanity, not keeping a space and a distance from other people that we disagree with, but we're here for the purpose of amplifying other people's humanity. You cannot do that unless you place yourself in a position or an opportunity to engage with people who do not think like you, to fight for causes that don't directly affect you. And so when you bring young people to our institution, we're not just bringing them to educate them for the purpose of them going out and enriching their own lives. We're bringing them so that they can go out and enrich the lives of others, and especially others with whom they cannot relate to, especially others who have a different background and experience from them. And that's what HBCUs have done consistently. We have amplified the humanity of others, and it is fine time that people appreciate what that amplification is. And that part of that amplification is that we need more people to participate in making sure that these institutions thrive. So thank you for your attention.
Well, all right, maybe you don't want me to say too much more. But as Judge Gregory has pointed out, I was fortunate to be able to be invited to Virginia State by Calvin Miller to speak to the class in constitutional law. And what I was trying to do is to prepare the students for what they would be facing in the real world. When I served as the only Black member of the state Senate, my view was to believe that if we could just get more people in to think like people who have been affected like me, and listening to my fellow panelists up here today, they've all hit it. One of the things though that stays with me, and I don't apologize, but that is when we speak about the decisions made by people years ago relative to the Moral Act and whatever it is, the people that were responsible for that were pretty much all white people. We have an integrated political society today. There is no reason, no need for people of color to continue to be denied equality of education at the highest level. And to that extent, we need to ask and to demand that that accountability be shown. I cited the instances of what took place in Maryland. And I don't mind saying to you here, if I were in the legislature, if I were in the Senate, there wasn't going to be any bill passed out there today unless you had what needed to be there for the people. And how do you stop it? You don't know how to do it, you need to get out of the way and let someone get there who knows.
So the comment I would like to make, which I know it might be a bit controversial. However, when you look at the topic of the symposium, which was HBCUs and the lack of support, I think the question is, why is there the absence, I'm sorry, not the lack, the absence of support? I think the answer to that lies directly in slavery. And that is because under the laws of slavery, you could do anything to an enslaved person except one thing, and that was to educate them. And the fear of educated African Americans in this country is still at the heart of why there is absence of funding for HBCUs. And then on the topic of partnerships, I'm very pleased to say, and I would like to join in thanking all of our panelists, and in particular, our moderator, Bob Holsworth, Attorney General Miyares, Judge Gregory, Dr. Douglas Glenn, President Frederick, and of course, our namesake, Governor Wilder. We are delighted, as I shared at the beginning of the program, that we will be honoring Governor Wilder January 20th for a national ovation that is long overdue. We're doing this in partnership with Virginia Union University and Howard University, Governor Wilder's two outings. And from that, and again, I wouldn't be doing my role as dean. From that, that's an opportunity for all of you to participate, because we are actively fundraising, not just to pay for the gala, but to establish scholarships for students, graduates of Virginia Union and Howard University, who then subsequently come to the Wilder School to pursue their graduate degrees. They will be able to, Virginia Union houses the Wilder papers at the Wilder Library. RISE has been involved in that partnership, so that when we're understanding the legacy of a living legend, Governor Wilder, students at all of these institutions and students across the world can learn from the best about public policy, effective actions, and how to realize the change of what is sought and what is the right thing to do. Thank you. So we thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you for those of us who have joined via live stream. And thanks again to all of our panelists.
Yeah.